1877 studio photo found, and restorers were stunned when they zoomed in on its eyes. On September 14th, 2024, Amanda Foster stood in the conservation laboratory of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, examining a photograph that had arrived 3 days earlier as part of a donated collection. The donation came from the estate of Margaret Harrison, a 90-year-old antiquarian who had spent her life collecting historical documents and photographs related to Philadelphia's 19th century history. Among the 200 items in the collection, this particular photograph had immediately caught Amanda's attention. The image showed 3 young women, approximately 16 to 18 years old, posed in a formal studio setting. The photograph was dated 1877, written in faded ink on the reverse side, along with a partial address, Chestnut Street Studio, Philadelphia. The cardboard mounting showed significant age deterioration, with water staining along the bottom edge and foxing throughout, but the photograph itself remained remarkably clear. Amanda specialized in photographic restoration and conservation, with particular expertise in 19th century American portraiture. She had worked at the museum for 12 years, handling thousands of historical photographs, but something about this image felt different. The composition was striking. 3 young women arranged in a triangular formation, their faces showing the characteristic seriousness of Victorian-era portraiture. Yet their positioning suggested genuine friendship rather than formal obligation. 2 of the young women were white, dressed in elaborate gowns with high collars and intricate lace detailing. The third, positioned slightly forward in the center of the composition, was a black woman wearing a simpler but well-made dress of dark fabric with modest ornamentation. In an era of rigid racial segregation, the very existence of this photograph, 3 young women of different races posed together as apparent equals, was historically significant. Amanda began the standard documentation process, photographing the image from multiple angles under controlled lighting conditions. She measured the dimensions, 8.2 by 10.1 inches, consistent with large format studio portraiture of the 1870s. The photograph showed characteristics of the albumin print process, common for that period, with a distinctive glossy surface and warm sepia tones. She then placed the photograph under her high-resolution digital scanner, a sophisticated piece of equipment capable of capturing microscopic details invisible to the naked eye. The scanner would create a digital file at 3,600 dots per inch, allowing her to examine every element of the original image with unprecedented clarity. This level of detail often revealed information that transformed understanding of historical photographs, evidence of retouching, hidden objects, or physical characteristics that changed how the image should be interpreted. As the scan completed and the image appeared on her monitor, Amanda began her systematic examination. She started with the background elements, noting the painted studio backdrop that suggested classical architecture. Then, she examined each young woman's clothing and positioning, looking for clues about their identities and relationships. Finally, she zoomed in on their faces, beginning with the young woman on the left, then the one on the right, and finally the black woman in the center. That's when Amanda saw something that made her freeze, her hand hovering over her mouse. Amanda increased the magnification to 800%, focusing on the face of the young black woman in the center of the photograph. At this level of detail, every feature became sharply defined. The texture of skin, the individual strands of hair carefully arranged, the fabric weave of her dress, and most strikingly, her eyes. The young woman's left eye appeared to be dark brown, consistent with what would be expected, but her right eye showed a distinctly different coloration, significantly lighter, appearing almost hazel or light brown even through the sepia tones of the 19th century photographic process. Amanda's first thought was that this must be a defect in the photograph itself, perhaps damage to the original negative or uneven chemical processing. She zoomed out and examined the photograph as a whole, looking for other signs of processing irregularities. The image showed consistent tonal range throughout. No other areas displayed unexpected color variations or chemical artifacts. The eye difference appeared to be genuine, a characteristic of the subject herself, not the photograph. Amanda pulled up her reference library of Victorian-era photographic defects and anomalies, comparing the image to known examples of chemical staining, light leaks, and processing errors. Nothing matched what she was seeing. She then examined the other 2 young women's eyes at the same magnification. Both showed consistent uniform coloration in both eyes. She sat back in her chair, considering the implications. If this wasn't a photographic defect, then the young woman in the image had heterochromia, a condition where the 2 eyes have different colors. The condition was rare in the general population, occurring in less than 1% of people, and even rarer among individuals of African descent due to the genetic factors that influenced eye pigmentation. But there was something else unusual about the way the eye appeared in the photograph. Amanda noticed what seemed to be deliberate retouching around the lighter eye, subtle manipulation of the photographic emulsion that suggested someone had tried to make the color difference less obvious. In the 1870s, photographers sometimes retouched portraits to correct perceived imperfections or enhance certain features. but this retouching seemed intended specifically to minimize rather than eliminate the color difference. Why would someone want to partially hide heterochromia while still leaving it visible? The condition wasn't considered shameful or problematic. If anything, it was simply an unusual physical characteristic, notable, but not stigmatizing. Amanda printed a high-resolution copy of the image and began making notes. She documented the eye color difference, the evidence of retouching, and the unusual composition of 3 young women of different races posed together as equals in 1877 Philadelphia. Each element individually was interesting. Together, they suggested a story that needed investigation. She pulled the original photograph from its protective sleeve and examined the reverse side more carefully. The partial address, Chestnut Street Studio, provided a starting point. She accessed the museum's database of Philadelphia business directories from the 1870s, searching for photography studios on Chestnut Street. 3 studios appeared in the 1877 directory. The largest and most prominent was Morrison Photography, which advertised portraits of distinguished families. The second was Blackwell Studio, specializing in commercial and industrial photography. The third, listed in smaller type, was simply called Howard Studio, Portraits of All Citizens. The phrase all citizens caught Amanda's attention. In the coded language of 19th century advertising, this likely indicated that the studio served clients regardless of race, a significant detail in an era when many businesses explicitly refused service to black customers. Amanda spent Monday morning at the Philadelphia City Archives, a neoclassical building on Broad Street that housed millions of historical documents dating back to the city's founding. She had called ahead to request any available records related to Howard Studio and photographers working on Chestnut Street in the 1870s. The archivist, a meticulous woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, had prepared several boxes of materials. Howard Studio is interesting, Patricia said as she laid out the documents. The photographer was Jonathan Howard, a Quaker who operated from 1869 to 1889. His business records show he deliberately cultivated clients from Philadelphia's black community, which was unusual for the time. The business ledgers revealed systematic documentation of Howard's studio work. Each entry included the client's name, date of sitting, type of photograph ordered, and payment received. The ledger for June 1877 showed an entry that immediately caught Amanda's attention. Portrait sitting, 3 young ladies. Client, Dr. Thomas Blackwell. Special commission. Payment, $15. $15 in 1877 was a substantial sum, equivalent to perhaps 2 weeks' wages for a working-class family or several months' rent. This wasn't a casual portrait sitting. Someone had invested significantly in creating this photograph. The name Dr. Thomas Blackwell resonated vaguely in Amanda's memory. She accessed the archive's biographical database and found multiple entries. Dr. Thomas Blackwell had been a prominent Philadelphia physician, practicing from the 1850s until his death in 1882. He had trained at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and established a practice that served both white and black patients, another unusual choice in an era of strict medical segregation. More intriguingly, Dr. Blackwell had been involved in various reform movements. Records showed his membership in the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, his work with the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War, and his advocacy for medical education reform. He had also been investigated by the Philadelphia Medical Society in 1875 for inappropriate professional conduct, though the specific charges were not detailed in the available records. Amanda photographed the relevant ledger pages and continued searching. She found Dr. Blackwell's death certificate, listing his cause of death as heart failure at age 59. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was brief and formal, noting his medical practice and his survival by a wife and 3 daughters. No mention of any sons or other children. But then Patricia pulled out another document, a probate record from 1882. Dr. Blackwell's will had been contested, leading to a legal proceeding that generated substantial documentation. Amanda began reading through the file, and within minutes she understood that she had found something significant. The will included a bequest to Miss Catherine Morris, daughter of Elizabeth Morris, in recognition of natural affection and past services rendered. The bequest amounted to $5,000, a fortune in 1882, along with certain personal property including medical books, instruments, and all photographic portraits in my possession depicting the said Catherine Morris. The will's language was carefully constructed, but its implications were clear to anyone familiar with 19th century legal terminology. Natural affection was often code for a biological relationship that could not be openly acknowledged. Dr. Blackwell was leaving money and property to a daughter he could not publicly claim. The probate contest had been filed by Dr. Blackwell's legitimate daughters, arguing that the bequest to Catherine Morris was improper and that she had no legal claim to their father's estate. The case had proceeded through Philadelphia's Orphans' Court in 1883, generating depositions, witness testimony, and judicial rulings. Amanda requested the complete probate file. It arrived in 3 document boxes containing hundreds of pages of legal records. She was going to need considerably more time to work through all of this material, but already she could see the outline of a story emerging, a story about identity, inheritance, race, and 3 young women whose friendship had been captured in a photograph that someone had paid a substantial sum to create. Amanda spent the next 3 days immersed in the probate records, reading through depositions and court testimonies that painted an increasingly complex picture of Dr. Thomas Blackwell's life and the circumstances surrounding Catherine Morris. The legal proceedings had been contentious, with Dr. Blackwell's 3 legitimate daughters, Margaret, Elizabeth, and Sarah, contesting the bequest on multiple grounds. The daughter's attorney had argued that Catherine Morris was not Dr. Blackwell's biological child, and that she had unduly influenced him in his final years. Their depositions described Catherine as a young black woman who had worked in their father's medical office as a clerk and assistant, beginning around 1873, when she would have been approximately 14 years old. They acknowledged that their father had shown her favoritism, paying for her education and treating her with more consideration than was appropriate for her station. But the most revealing testimony came from witnesses supporting Catherine's claim. A deposition from Dr. Samuel Foster, a colleague of Dr. Blackwell's, stated plainly, "I have known Thomas Blackwell for 25 years. He confided in me in 1875 that Catherine Morris was his daughter by Elizabeth Morris, a free woman of color with whom he had maintained a relationship before his marriage. He felt great responsibility for Catherine's welfare and wished to ensure her future security." Another witness, a nurse named Mary Patterson, who had worked in Dr. Blackwell's practice, provided even more specific details. Dr. Blackwell told me that Catherine's mother, Elizabeth Morris, had died in 1874 of consumption. Before her death, she had made him promise to look after Catherine. He honored that promise by bringing Catherine into his office and ensuring she received proper education. He was particularly concerned about Catherine's distinctive appearance. She had one eye that was lighter than the other, which Dr. Blackwell said was a family trait inherited from his side. Amanda stopped reading and returned to the photograph on her desk. The heterochromia hadn't been a random genetic occurrence. It was a family trait, evidence of Catherine's biological connection to Dr. Blackwell. In an era when children of mixed-race relationships occupied a precarious legal and social position, this distinctive physical characteristic served as unmistakable proof of paternity. The probate records continued with testimony about Catherine's character and circumstances. Multiple witnesses described her as intelligent, well-educated, and respected within both the black and white communities she navigated. Several testified that Dr. Blackwell's 3 legitimate daughters had known about Catherine for years and had even befriended her, which explained the photograph showing 3 young women of different races posed together. A particularly striking deposition came from Jonathan Howard, the photographer who had taken the portrait. He testified, Dr. Blackwell commissioned the photograph in June 1877. He specified that he wanted a formal portrait of his 3 daughters together. He used that word specifically, daughters. He explained that Catherine's distinctive eye coloring made some people uncomfortable, and he asked if I could minimize it slightly in the final print without eliminating it entirely. He wanted the photograph to show Catherine as she was, but in a way that would not invite unwanted questions or comments. I performed minimal retouching to soften the color contrast while preserving the characteristic. So the retouching Amanda had noticed wasn't an attempt to hide the heterochromia. It was a careful balance between acknowledging Catherine's distinctive appearance and protecting her from the social consequences of being too visibly different in an era of rigid racial categories. The court's final ruling, issued in May 1883, was a compromise. Judge William Hamilton acknowledged that the testimony strongly suggested Catherine Morris was indeed Dr. Blackwell's daughter, but noted that 19th century law did not recognize children born outside of marriage as legal heirs with the same rights as legitimate children. However, the judge upheld Dr. Blackwell's right to make whatever bequests he chose in his will. Catherine received the $5,000 and the personal property, though the legitimate daughters retained the bulk of the estate, including their father's house, medical practice building, and remaining financial assets. The judge's written opinion included a remarkable statement for 1883. While the law cannot recognize Miss Morris's claim to equal inheritance, simple justice and human decency require that Dr. Blackwell's wishes be honored. He sought to provide for a young woman to whom he felt responsibility. This court will not overturn those provisions. With Catherine Morris's name confirmed, Amanda began the process of tracing what had happened to her after the probate case concluded. The 1880 United States Census, taken 3 years after the photograph, listed Catherine Morris, age 21, as living in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, a predominantly black neighborhood. Her occupation was listed as medical assistant, and she lived in a boarding house on Lombard Street. The 1883 Philadelphia City Directory showed Catherine operating a small medical practice of her own, not as a licensed physician, which would have been nearly impossible for a woman, especially a black woman at that time, but as what was termed a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner. Her advertisement in the directory read, Catherine Morris, Medical Assistance for Women and Children, Diseases of the Eye, a Specialty, No. 412, Lombard Street. The specialization in eye diseases made sense given her own distinctive condition. Amanda wondered if Catherine had turned her unusual characteristic into professional expertise, perhaps studying ophthalmology under her father's guidance before his death. Amanda then searched newspaper archives, looking for any mentions of Catherine Morris in Philadelphia papers between 1880 and 1900. She found surprisingly numerous references. Catherine had been active in several reform organizations, including the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society and the Women's Medical College Advocacy Group. Several articles mentioned her work providing medical care to poor women in South Philadelphia. One article from the Philadelphia Tribune, a black newspaper dated November 1889, provided substantial detail. Miss Catherine Morris has established a dispensary for eye ailments at her practice on Lombard Street. Miss Morris, who herself possesses a rare ocular condition, has made a particular study of diseases and injuries of the eye. She treats patients regardless of their ability to pay, and has gained recognition for her skill in preserving sight among factory workers and others whose employment damages their vision. But what had happened to Catherine's relationship with her half-sisters? Amanda returned to the photograph, looking at the three young women posed together. Margaret, Elizabeth, and Sarah Blackwell, Dr. Blackwell's legitimate daughters, and Catherine Morris, his unacknowledged daughter, captured in a single image that represented both connection and separation. Amanda found a clue in an unexpected place: the records of the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, a pioneering institution that provided art and design education to women when most universities excluded them. The school's enrollment records from 1878 to 1880 showed three students: Margaret Blackwell, Sarah Blackwell, and Catherine Morris, all studying together in the illustration and medical drawing courses. They had remained friends, or at least continued their connection, after the photograph was taken. Despite the social barriers of race and the complicated family dynamics, the three young women had pursued their education together. Amanda found Margaret Blackwell's name in city directories through the 1890s, listed as a medical illustrator. Sarah Blackwell appeared in records as a teacher at a girls' academy. Both women had never married, dedicating themselves to professional work, unusual but not unheard of for educated women of their generation. Then Amanda discovered something remarkable, a publication from 1895 titled Illustrated Guide to Ocular Diseases and Treatments by Catherine Morris and Margaret Blackwell. The volume, published by a small Philadelphia medical press, combined Catherine's medical expertise with Margaret's illustration skills. The book's preface, written jointly by both authors, included a dedication to the memory of Dr. Thomas Blackwell, who taught us that knowledge and compassion transcend all artificial boundaries. Amanda contacted the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, an institution that maintained extensive archives of 19th century medical history. The librarian, Dr. Robert Kim, was intrigued by her inquiry about Catherine Morris and the illustrated medical guide she had co-authored with Margaret Blackwell. The 1890s were a fascinating period for ophthalmology, Robert explained when Amanda visited the college's library on a rainy Thursday morning. The field was just developing as a medical specialty. Most physicians had minimal training in eye diseases. Someone like Catherine Morris, working outside the formal medical establishment, could make real contributions if she had the right combination of practical experience and systematic study. Robert had pulled several relevant materials: medical journals from the 1890s, membership records of medical societies, and copies of various publications related to eye diseases. Among them was the illustrated guide Amanda had discovered, a slim volume of approximately 80 pages with detailed anatomical drawings and treatment protocols. The book was remarkably sophisticated for its era. Catherine's text demonstrated thorough knowledge of ocular anatomy, common diseases like cataracts and glaucoma, traumatic injuries, and infections. Margaret's illustrations showed precise anatomical detail, clearly drawn from direct observation of actual patients and medical procedures. Several illustrations specifically depicted heterochromia and other pigmentation variations, with detailed notes about how to distinguish harmless conditions from pathological changes. "This is high-quality medical work," Robert said, carefully turning the pages. "The treatment protocols are consistent with the best medical knowledge of the period, and some of these observations about eye injuries among factory workers predate the industrial medicine movement by several years. Catherine Morris was documenting occupational health hazards before most physicians recognized them as a distinct medical concern." Robert showed Amanda a review of the book published in the Pennsylvania Medical Journal in 1896. The review was mixed, praising the quality of the illustrations and the practical utility of the treatment descriptions, while noting that the authors lack formal medical credentials. The reviewer concluded, "Despite the irregular nature of Miss Morris's medical practice, this volume demonstrates considerable clinical experience and should be of value to rural physicians and others who encounter eye diseases without ready access to specialized consultation. Amanda asked about the heterochromia Catherine displayed in the photograph. Would that have affected her medical career or how she was perceived? Almost certainly, Robert replied. Unusual physical characteristics were often interpreted through the lens of 19th century pseudoscientific theories about heredity, race, and fitness. Heterochromia might be seen as evidence of mixed blood or degeneration. But it also might have given her credibility as someone who understood eye conditions from personal experience. It's complicated. He pulled out another document, a letter written by Dr. Thomas Blackwell to a colleague in 1876, 1 year before the photograph was taken. The letter had been preserved in the college's manuscript collection as part of a larger correspondence about medical education reform. In the letter, Dr. Blackwell wrote, "I have taken into my practice a young woman of considerable intelligence who possesses a distinctive physical characteristic